The first snow of December fell silently over the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, where the city's wealthiest guests gathered beneath crystal chandeliers for a charity gala. Outside, hidden behind a frozen glass pavilion, a poorly paid maid named Elaine Owens slipped off her only uniform jacket and wrapped it around a little girl shivering in the bitter cold. The child buried her face against Elaine's shoulder, trembling as she whispered one heartbreaking word. Mom. Neither of them noticed the powerful man standing motionless behind the glass, watching everything unfold with tears slowly filling his eyes. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. And if stories about quiet kindness and second chances touch your heart, we'd love to have you join our community by subscribing. 3 days before anyone at the Bennett Winter Charity Gala would learn her name, Elaine Owens woke up at exactly 4:45 every morning to the sound of a battered alarm clock that had lost its snooze button years ago. She never complained about it. Outside her apartment window in South Boston, the streets were still wrapped in darkness. A thin layer of snow rested on parked cars, and the orange glow from a distant street lamp painted quiet shadows across the cracked sidewalk. The old radiator beside her bed hissed weakly, struggling against the December cold. Elaine sat up slowly, rubbing warmth into her hands before reaching for the framed photograph on her nightstand. It showed a smiling little girl missing her 2 front teeth. The photograph was old enough that the colors had begun to fade, but Elaine never replaced it. She believed memories were supposed to age honestly. She traced one finger over the girl's face. "Morning, Ava," she whispered. It had been 8 years. 8 years since her daughter had died from complications related to a congenital heart condition. 8 years since the hospital room had gone unbearably quiet. 8 years since Elaine had walked out carrying nothing except a paper bag filled with a tiny sweater, a stuffed rabbit, and one folded navy blue handkerchief, embroidered with a single silver star. That handkerchief never left her side. She unfolded it carefully every morning, smoothing the wrinkles with her fingertips before slipping it into the breast pocket of her housekeeping uniform. The silver thread had begun to loosen around the edges, but the tiny star still caught the light. Her mother had sewn it years earlier. "A star always shines," her mother used to say, "even when nobody's looking." Elaine smiled faintly. No child should ever feel cold and alone. The sentence escaped her lips almost automatically. It wasn't a prayer anymore. It was simply the way she lived. By 5:20 a.m., she was standing at the bus stop with a worn canvas lunch bag and a reusable coffee mug that had been repaired twice with clear adhesive. The number 7 bus arrived 4 minutes late. The driver knew her. "Morning, Miss Owens." "Morning, Calvin." "You working another double?" She laughed softly. "When don't I?" He shook his head. "You deserve a vacation." Elaine looked through the frosted window. "I'd settle for 8 hours of sleep." Both of them laughed before silence returned. Downtown Boston slowly woke outside the bus windows. Bakery workers unlocked storefronts. Delivery trucks backed into loading docks. Snowplows crawled along narrow streets. People hurried toward offices with expensive coats wrapped tightly around them. Elaine watched them without envy. She had stopped comparing her life to other people's years ago. At exactly 6:02 a.m., she stepped inside Harborview medical offices, where she cleaned hallways before employees arrived. She worked quickly. Trash first, bathroom second, floors last. Every movement followed a rhythm she had perfected over nearly 18 years. At 6:47, she noticed fresh footprints leading toward the pediatric waiting room. A little boy sat alone in one corner, maybe 5 years old. His mother slept awkwardly across 2 plastic chairs after what looked like another overnight stay. The boy's mitten had slipped off. His tiny fingers were bright red from the cold. Elaine quietly approached. "May I?" The boy nodded. She picked up the mitten and carefully slid it back onto his hand. "There." He smiled. Thank you. No problem. Before leaving, Elaine reached into her lunch bag and placed a small clementine beside him. My favorite breakfast. His eyes grew wide. Really? The sweetest ones are always the smallest. He grinned. Elaine continued mopping this hallway as though nothing had happened. Nobody applauded. Nobody noticed. She preferred it that way. At 10:30 a.m., her first shift ended. Most employees headed home. Elaine walked 3 blocks to a neighborhood diner where she spent 4 hours washing dishes during lunch service. The owner, Mrs. Delgado, slid a bowl of hot chicken soup toward her during the afternoon break. You look exhausted. I feel fine. You always say that, Elaine smiled. If I admit I'm tired, the dishes won't wash themselves. Mrs. Delgado sighed. You remind me of my mother. I hope that's a compliment. It is. They shared quiet laughter before Elaine returned to the kitchen. By 3:15 p.m., she changed into a second uniform, dark charcoal gray, pressed neatly despite being several years old. Housekeeping services, Boston elite events. Her final shift had begun. Every December, Boston's luxury hotels, museums, and private estates hired temporary housekeeping crews to prepare charity galas, award ceremonies, and holiday fundraisers. The pay wasn't glamorous. $23 an hour. No benefits. No guaranteed schedule after New Year's. But over time during December helped Elaine keep paying the remaining hospital debt she had refused to ignore. Most people had told her to declare bankruptcy years earlier. She never did. They cared for Ava, she often said. I owe them more than money. The staff entrance of Boston Museum of Fine Arts buzzed with activity. Rolling carts filled with polished silverware lined the corridors. Florists rushed past carrying towering white orchids. Electricians adjusted spotlights. Caterers hurried between kitchens. Everyone moved fast. Everyone except Marcus Hill. The 62-year-old housekeeping supervisor stood near the employee lockers, sipping black coffee from an old thermos. His gray beard had more white than black now, and arthritis slowed his hands, but nobody knew the museum better than Marcus. He noticed Elaine immediately. Morning, kid. She laughed. One? I'm 41. You'll always be a kid compared to me. He handed her a printed assignment sheet. Big gala this weekend? I heard. 300 guests. She scanned the schedule. The event covered nearly every exhibition hall. Long night? Marcus nodded. The biggest one all year? He lowered his voice. Rebecca's already in a mood. Elaine smiled knowingly. When isn't she? Almost on cue, sharp heels echoed across the marble floor. Rebecca Collins entered carrying a tablet and a clipboard. Perfect suit, perfect hair, perfect posture. She rarely smiled. Listen up, everyone. Conversation stopped immediately. I expect perfection. Her eyes moved across the housekeeping staff. No visible conversations. No unnecessary breaks. No interacting with guests. No exceptions. She looked directly at Elaine. And please remember, you are part of the background. The guests are paying to enjoy elegance. They're not paying to notice you. Silence filled the hallway. A few employees lowered their eyes. Elaine simply nodded. Understood. Marcus watched Rebecca walk away before muttering quietly. One of these days she's going to discover we're human. Elaine picked up her cleaning cart. I hope so. You should have defended yourself. Elaine shook her head. People don't always mean what they say. Marcus frowned. I think she does. Maybe. Elaine smiled anyway, but I don't want bitterness following me home. Marcus sighed. I honestly don't know how you do that. Elaine glanced toward the navy handkerchief tucked neatly inside her uniform pocket. My mother used to tell me something. What? If the world gives you a chance to make someone else's day lighter? She paused before gently touching the tiny silver star embroidered into the cloth. And don't waste it carrying anger instead. Marcus looked at her for a long moment before smiling. White. You always did inherit the right things. Elaine quietly pushed her cart toward the grand marble staircase leading into the museum's east wing. Neither of them knew that somewhere in another part of Boston, preparations had already begun for a little girl who would soon change Elaine's life forever. Across the Charles River, nearly 12 miles from Elaine Owen's modest apartment, another alarm rang at exactly 6:30 that same morning. Its soft melody echoed through a mansion so large that sound seemed to disappear before reaching the next room. The Bennett residence stood on a quiet hill in Brookline, surrounded by towering maple trees now stripped bare by winter. Built nearly a century earlier, from pale limestone, the estate overlooked Boston's skyline like a silent guardian. Inside, polished marble floors reflected the glow of antique chandeliers, while paintings worth millions decorated walls that rarely heard laughter. Luxury filled every corner. Warmth did not. 7-year-old Sophia Bennett opened her eyes before anyone came to wake her. She had learned long ago not to expect someone sitting beside her bed in the mornings. Instead, she reached beneath her blanket and pulled out a worn brown teddy bear with one slightly crooked ear. "Morning, Mr. Buttons," she whispered. She hugged him tightly. "You stayed." The bear had once belonged to her adoptive mother, Evelyn Bennett, who had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. Nobody had thrown it away. Nobody except Sophia still talked to it. A digital clock on the nightstand changed from 6:31 to 6:32. Sophia listened carefully. Silence. No footsteps, no voices. Only the distant humming of the heating system flowing through the enormous house. She climbed out of bed and padded across the soft rug toward the window. Fresh snow covered the gardens below. The stone fountain wore a white cap. Even the bronze horse statue near the driveway seemed frozen in time. Sophia pressed one finger against the cold glass. "I wish snow could talk." Behind her, someone knocked gently. "Good morning, Miss Sophia." It was Denise, the morning nanny. She entered carrying neatly pressed clothes. "A navy dress today?" Sophia nodded politely. "Thank you." Denise smiled. "Your father has breakfast waiting." Sophia glanced towards the hallway. "Is Daddy home?" "He is." A small smile appeared immediately. "Really? He has a meeting later, but he's downstairs." Sophia hurried to change clothes faster than usual. Moments like these had become rare. Jonathan Bennett rarely missed providing for his daughter. He often missed being with her. By 7:05, Sophia stepped into the breakfast room. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snowy lawn. The dining table could comfortably seat 16 people. Only 2 chairs were occupied. Jonathan Bennett looked up from a tablet displaying quarterly reports. He wore a charcoal suit despite the early hour. His coffee had already gone cold. His phone vibrated every few minutes. When he saw Sophia, his expression softened instantly. "There's my girl," Sophia smiled. "Good morning, Daddy." He stood and kissed the top of her head before pulling out her chair. "What would you like today?" She looked at the table. Fresh fruit, Belgian waffles, eggs, croissants, orange juice, everything prepared perfectly. "I'll have oatmeal." Jonathan blinked. "Just oatmeal." She nodded. "I like it when it's warm." He smiled. "Warm oatmeal coming." Mrs. Jenkins, the housekeeper, quietly served the bowl before disappearing back into the kitchen. Jonathan watched Sophia sprinkle cinnamon across the top. "You know what today is." She looked up. "Wednesday." He laughed. "Besides that." She thought carefully. "The museum rehearsal?" "Exactly. Our foundation's winter gala is this Saturday. You'll be coming with me?" Sophia stirred her oatmeal slowly. Will it be crowded? A little. A little. Jonathan hesitated. Maybe more than a little. She lowered her eyes. I don't really like crowds. He reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. I know. But you'll only stay for the opening. Then Denise will take you home. Sophia nodded. Okay. Jonathan's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen. Board chair calling. He declined it for the moment. I have something for you. He reached into his briefcase and removed a beautifully wrapped package tied with silver ribbon. Sophia looked surprised. You didn't have to. I wanted to. Inside was a delicate silver snowflake necklace. Real diamonds sparkled beneath the dining room lights. It's beautiful. It reminded me of winter. She smiled politely. Thank you. She placed it carefully back inside the box. Jonathan noticed. You're not wearing it. I don't want to lose it. You won't. She looked at the necklace once more. It feels too special. Jonathan misunderstood. We can buy another if something happens. Sophia quietly shook her head. I don't think everything can be replaced. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. Jonathan suddenly remembered another winter morning years earlier. Evelyn had once said almost the exact same sentence while repairing Sophia's favorite paper snowflake after it had torn. Some things matter because they were loved, not because they were expensive. His chest tightened. Before he could answer, his assistant called. Mr. Bennett. A young man appeared in the doorway holding a folder. The board members have arrived early. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. Already. I'm afraid so. He looked back at Sophia. I'll be right back. She smiled. It's okay. You eat. I'll finish quickly. He stood. I promise we'll decorate the Christmas tree tonight. Sophia's face brightened. Really? I promise. She nodded enthusiastically. I'll wait. Jonathan smiled before disappearing down the hallway. Sophia continued eating alone. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, Denise entered quietly. Miss Sophia. Yes. Your father had to leave for the office. Oh, he asked me to tell you he'll make it up to you. Sophia looked toward the untouched second chair. The coffee cup still sat there, half full, already cold. She simply nodded. It's okay. Denise knew it wasn't. Later that afternoon, Jonathan stood inside the executive conference room overlooking downtown Boston. The walls were lined with photographs documenting the Bennett Foundation's charitable work over 3 decades. Scholarships, hospitals, veterans, community centers. Millions of dollars donated. Thousands of lives improved. Board members applauded Jonathan's presentation. The Winter Gala has exceeded every fundraising projection. This year's target of $25 million is well within reach. Another executive smiled. The press coverage alone will be incredible. Jonathan thanked them politely. Then someone asked the question he had heard dozens of times. And your daughter? Will she attend? She'll make a wonderful public face for the foundation. Jonathan answered carefully. Yes. She'll be there. Everyone seemed pleased. No one asked whether Sophia actually wanted to come. When the meeting ended, Jonathan remained alone in the conference room. Through the glass wall, he could see Boston Harbor shining beneath pale winter sunlight. His assistant entered quietly. Sir. Yes. I almost forgot. He handed Jonathan a drawing that had arrived from the mansion. Miss Sophia wanted you to have this. Jonathan unfolded the paper. It showed a little girl holding hands with a man beneath falling snow. The drawing wasn't remarkable. Children drew families every day. But one detail stopped him cold. The man had no face, only an empty outline. On the back, written carefully in uneven handwriting, were 7 simple words. "I'm still waiting for your promise tonight." Jonathan closed his eyes. He looked at his watch. 4:18 p.m. He still had 5 meetings, a dinner with donors, 2 interviews, preparations for Saturday's gala. He picked up his phone, then slowly canceled the donor dinner. His assistant stared in surprise. "Sir," Jonathan folded the drawing carefully. "I made my daughter a promise." Outside snow continued falling over Boston. Neither Jonathan nor Sophia could possibly know that within 3 days, a woman neither of them had truly met would quietly step into both of their lives carrying nothing more valuable than a worn housekeeping uniform, a faded navy handkerchief embroidered with a silver star, and a heart that had never stopped making room for children who needed warmth. Thursday arrived with a sharp wind that swept across Boston Harbor and rattled the bare branches lining Huntington Avenue. By 2:10 that afternoon, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts had transformed into something that resembled a living stage before the actors arrived. Towering floral arrangements filled the grand rotunda. Long banquet tables disappeared beneath ivory linen. Crystal glasses caught the afternoon sunlight like tiny stars scattered across polished wood. Technicians climbed ladders adjusting chandeliers. String quartets rehearsed in distant galleries. Chefs rolled stainless steel carts through service corridors. Every person moved with urgency. Every minute mattered. Elaine Owens signed her name on the employee attendance sheet at exactly 2:27 p.m. She believed arriving early was a quiet form of respect. Marcus Hill noticed immediately. "You beat the clock again." Elaine smiled. "The bus was only 1 minute late today." Marcus chuckled. "Must be a Christmas miracle." She laughed softly before tying her navy housekeeping apron over the charcoal gray uniform. The embroidered company logo had begun to fade after years of washing. She carefully straightened the collar anyway. Her appearance had never depended on expensive clothing, only on dignity. Marcus handed her today's assignment. East Gallery. Glass Pavilion. VIP Lounge. Elaine scanned the paper. "That's almost the whole first floor. Big event." He shrugged apologetically. "We're short 3 people." "No problem." He lowered his voice. "Take your breaks today." "I mean it." "I will." They both knew she probably wouldn't. The employee hallway suddenly fell silent. Rebecca Collins entered carrying a wireless headset and 2 tablets. Her black blazer looked freshly tailored. Not a single strand of hair had escaped its perfect bun. She walked with the confidence of someone who believed efficiency solved every problem. "Housekeeping." Everyone turned. She didn't greet them. She rarely did. "The Bennett Foundation inspection begins at 4. I don't want fingerprints on glass. I don't want trash bins half full. I don't want guests seeing supply carts." She looked directly toward Elaine. "And absolutely no conversations with attendees. Children included." Elaine blinked slightly. Rebecca continued. "If a child appears lost, notify security. That is your responsibility. Not comforting them. Not entertaining them. Not leaving your assigned zone. Security." Her tone left no room for discussion. "Understood," a chorus answered. "Yes, ma'am." Rebecca nodded once. "Good." Then she disappeared around the corner without another word. Marcus waited until she was gone. "I sometimes wonder if she schedules time to breathe." Elaine smiled while organizing bottles inside her cleaning cart. "She carries a lot of responsibility." Marcus stared at her. "You always find excuses for people." "I try to find reasons." "That's different." He shook his head. "Most folks would have been angry after that speech." Elaine gently folded the navy handkerchief inside her pocket. "Anger doesn't polish floors." Marcus laughed so loudly that another employee turned to look. You really are something. By 3 o'clock, the museum had become almost unrecognizable. Visitors had already left for the day. Temporary velvet ropes divided exhibition halls. Spotlights illuminated priceless paintings. The scent of fresh, evergreen garlands mixed with polished oak and expensive perfume samples drifting from cosmetic sponsors setting up promotional displays. Elaine pushed her cleaning cart quietly across the marble corridor leading toward the East Gallery. She worked without rushing. She believed careful work actually saved time. She wiped fingerprints from glass display cases, adjusted crooked information cards, collected discarded water bottles left by contractors, straightened chairs no one else had noticed. Every few minutes she checked the silver star handkerchief resting safely inside her pocket. Not because she needed it, simply because touching it reminded her that kindness deserved consistency. At 3:42 p.m., she heard muffled voices echoing from a nearby hallway. Two young catering assistants struggled with a dessert cart that had become wedged against an elevator threshold. One wheel had locked. The heavy cart refused to move. "I'm sorry," one of them whispered nervously. "If we're late, they'll fire us." Elaine quietly parked her cleaning cart. "May I help?" The two women looked relieved. Together, they lifted one corner just enough for Elaine to free the damaged wheel. "There." The cart rolled smoothly again. One assistant smiled gratefully. "Thank you. You saved us." Elaine shrugged. "You would have figured it out?" "Maybe. But not before the chef yelled." They laughed. Elaine returned to her work before anyone else noticed. Unfortunately, someone had. Rebecca stood at the far end of the hallway. She approached slowly. "Miss Owens." Elaine turned immediately. "Yes." "Miss Collins?" "Were those catering responsibilities assigned to you?" "No." "Then why were you handling their equipment?" "They were stuck." Rebecca crossed her arms. "And now you're behind schedule." Elaine glanced toward the polished floor. "I'll make up the time." Rebecca sighed. "You misunderstand your job. Your responsibility isn't saving everyone. It's completing your assigned tasks," Elaine answered gently. "I completed both." Rebecca looked almost irritated by the calm reply. "I expect your section finished by inspection." "It will be." Rebecca studied her face for another second before walking away. Marcus had witnessed the entire exchange from a nearby doorway. He shook his head after Rebecca disappeared. "You just earned yourself another lecture?" Elaine smiled. "It lasted less than a minute." Marcus muttered, "One day she's going to realize people aren't machines." Elaine simply continued polishing the brass handrail leading toward the museum's children's education wing. The afternoon passed steadily. By 4 o'clock, executives from the Bennett Foundation began touring the museum alongside architects, lighting designers, and event coordinators. Jonathan Bennett wasn't among them. His assistant handled the walkthrough instead. Rebecca remained close behind the group, pointing out decorations with flawless confidence. Meanwhile, in another section of the museum, a very different visitor had quietly arrived. Sophia Bennett stepped through the staff entrance holding Denise's hand. She wore a navy wool coat with matching gloves and small black boots that clicked softly against the marble floor. "This is where Daddy's party will be," Denise smiled. "Almost. They're checking everything today." Sophia looked around with wide eyes. The museum seemed enormous. High ceilings stretched above her. Ancient sculptures stood silently along the corridors. Massive paintings watched from every wall. "It's beautiful." "It is." Denise answered a phone call from Jonathan's office. "I'll only be 1 minute." Sophia nodded obediently. "I'll stay here." She truly intended to. But children often discover wonder faster than adults discover worry. Only a few steps away stood a gallery displaying winter landscapes painted more than 100 years earlier. Snow-covered forests, frozen rivers, small cottages glowing beneath moonlight. Sophia wandered toward them almost without thinking. She stopped before one painting, showing a little girl wrapped in a blue scarf, feeding birds during winter. "It looks lonely," she whispered. She didn't realize Denise had stepped into another hallway searching for better phone reception. Nor did she notice she had already walked farther than she intended. Meanwhile, Elaine rounded the corner carrying fresh microfiber towels. She nearly passed the gallery before hearing a tiny voice. "Excuse me." Elaine turned. Sophia stood alone in front of the painting. Neither recognized the other. "Yes, sweetheart?" Sophia pointed toward the canvas. "Do you think she's cold?" Elaine looked carefully. "I think she probably is." "Then why is she smiling?" Elaine stepped closer, kneeling until her eyes were level with Sophia's. "Maybe because someone she loves is waiting for her at home." Sophia looked back at the painting. "What if nobody's waiting?" Elaine remained quiet for a moment. Then she answered honestly. "Sometimes. Someone you haven't met yet ends up becoming the warmth you needed." Sophia considered the answer carefully. "I like that." Elaine smiled. "I'm glad." Before either of them could say another word, hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway. "There you are." Denise rushed forward, visibly relieved. "Oh my goodness, Miss Sophia. I told you to stay by the entrance." "I'm sorry." "I saw the snow painting." Denise exhaled slowly before thanking Elaine. "I'm sorry if she interrupted your work." "Not at all." Elaine smiled warmly. She has excellent taste in art. Sophia looked up at Elaine. "Thank you for talking to me." "You're welcome." For one brief second, Sophia memorized Elaine's gentle smile, the calm warmth in her voice, and the tiny silver star embroidered on the navy handkerchief peeking from her uniform pocket. Neither of them knew that only 2 days later, in the bitter cold outside this very museum, those small details would become the only thing Sophia could remember when fear and freezing wind blurred everything else. Saturday arrived wrapped in a sky the color of brushed steel. By 7 o'clock that morning, Boston had already begun preparing for what local newspapers were calling the city's most anticipated charity event of the year, the Bennett Foundation Winter Gala. Luxury sedans rolled through snow-covered streets carrying floral designers, television crews, celebrity chefs, musicians, and volunteers toward the Museum of Fine Arts. Along Huntington Avenue, temporary barriers directed traffic while security officers checked deliveries one by one. Inside the museum, however, nobody admired the decorations anymore. Everyone was racing against time. Elaine Owen stepped through the employee entrance at exactly 8:02 a.m., carrying the same canvas lunch bag she had used for nearly 6 years. She paused just long enough to brush snow from her boots before signing in. Marcus Hill glanced at the clock and smiled. "You've been exactly on time every Saturday for 5 years." Elaine laughed. "I don't want to ruin my streak now." Marcus handed her a fresh radio. "We're all wearing these tonight." "Security wants every department connected." Elaine clipped it onto her belt. "Anything unusual?" Marcus nodded. "Everything." He pointed toward the enormous ballroom schedule taped to the wall. 487 confirmed guests. 23 board members. State officials. Television crews. And enough millionaires to buy this museum twice. Elaine whistled softly. "Sounds busy." Marcus lowered his voice. "And Rebecca's already had 3 cups of coffee." Elaine smiled. "I'll stay out of her way." "I'm serious." She hasn't smiled once. "I don't think that's new." Marcus laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. Before he could answer, Rebecca's voice echoed through the hallway. "Housekeeping briefing." Employees gathered immediately. Rebecca stood beneath a digital floor plan projected onto the wall. She didn't waste time. "Tonight's schedule is non-negotiable." She tapped the screen. "Guests begin arriving at 6. Opening remarks at 7. Live auction at 8. Dinner service immediately afterward. No mistakes. Her eyes moved across every employee. If you see spilled drinks, clean them. If you see broken glass, report it. If you see guests needing assistance, notify hospitality. She'd paused deliberately. You are not the hospitality staff. You are not security. You are not child care. You are housekeeping. She looked directly toward Elaine once again. If any child becomes separated from a parent, contact security immediately. Do not attempt to solve the situation yourself. Elaine nodded respectfully. Understood. Rebecca seemed satisfied. Good. Remember, the success of tonight depends on remaining invisible. When the meeting ended, employees quietly dispersed. Marcus walked beside Elaine toward the storage room. I swear she practices those speeches. Elaine smiled while loading fresh microfiber cloths onto her cart. She wants everything perfect. Maybe, Marcus shrugged, but people aren't decorations. Elaine looked toward the enormous museum lobby already glowing beneath thousands of lights. No, they're not. By early afternoon, the museum no longer resembled the peaceful gallery visitors knew during normal hours. Champagne towers stood ready beneath crystal chandeliers. White roses and evergreen branches wrapped around marble columns. A string orchestra rehearsed near the grand staircase. Servers practiced synchronized movements between banquet tables. The scent of roasted filet mignon drifted through service corridors. Outside workers shoveled fresh snow every 30 minutes as another winter storm slowly approached from the Atlantic. Television meteorologists warned temperatures would fall below 20 degrees shortly after sunset. Inside, nobody seemed concerned. Heat flowed comfortably through every room, except one. At precisely 2:45 p.m., a maintenance technician frowned while examining a digital control panel connected to the museum's enclosed sculpture garden. He tapped several buttons. Nothing changed. The outdoor heating system displayed an intermittent warning. Sensor malfunction? He sighed. We'll look at it after rehearsal. The warning light continued blinking unnoticed. At almost the same time, Jonathan Bennett's black SUV turned into the museum's private entrance. Security immediately opened the gates. Jonathan stepped out wearing a tailored midnight blue tuxedo beneath a long black overcoat. His assistant hurried beside him. The governor confirmed attendance. The auction catalogs have arrived. The press interviews begin at 5:15. Jonathan nodded while walking. What about Sophia? She's coming with Denise at 5. Jonathan checked his watch. I want to see her before guests arrive. We've reserved the family lounge. Good. He stopped briefly near the grand hall. Everything looked magnificent. Yet instead of admiring the decorations, he found himself remembering a child's drawing folded inside his wallet, the faceless father beneath falling snow. He touched the wallet instinctively, then continued toward another meeting. At 4:30 that afternoon, Denise helped Sophia button a cream-colored winter coat over her navy velvet dress. You look beautiful, Sophia smiled shyly. Do I have to wear the shiny shoes? They match your dress. They're slippery, Denise laughed. We'll change them before you leave. Sophia reached for Mr. Buttons, the old teddy bear. Denise hesitated. I'm not sure your father wants stuffed animals at the gala. Sophia looked disappointed. He gets nervous too. Nervous when lots of people are around. Denise couldn't help smiling. All right. But he stays in the car. Sophia nodded seriously. Deal. The drive into Boston took nearly 40 minutes. Snowflakes drifted lazily across the windshield. Holiday lights reflected beautifully along the Charles River. Sophia quietly watched the city pass. Denise. Yes. Do you think museums get lonely at night? Denise smiled. I've never thought about it. I think they might. Why? Because paintings can't talk to each other. Denise reached over and gently squeezed her hand. I don't think they'd be lonely tonight. There'll be hundreds of people. Sophia looked out the window again. Sometimes hundreds of people still feels lonely. Denise glanced toward her without answering. Some questions deserved silence more than explanations. Back inside the museum, Elaine had almost completed her assigned floor. She carefully polished the final brass railing before checking her watch. 5:18 p.m. Guests would begin arriving in less than an hour. Marcus approached carrying a clipboard. Everything good? East Gallery's finished. Glass Pavilion too. Marcus nodded approvingly. I knew it would be. He lowered his voice. Have you eaten yet? Elaine smiled guiltily. Not yet. Elaine. I know. She finally opened her lunch bag. Inside sat a turkey sandwich wrapped in waxed paper, a small apple, and a homemade oatmeal cookie Mrs. Delgado had insisted she take. She had barely finished half the sandwich when her radio crackled. Housekeeping to grand entrance. Housekeeping to grand entrance. Elaine stood immediately. So much for lunch, Marcus sighed. I'll save the cookie. She hurried toward the front lobby, where the first photographers were already setting up equipment. Outside, long lines of black vehicles waited beneath gently falling snow. Flashbulbs began lighting the evening. Inside, musicians tuned their instruments one last time. At exactly 5:56 p.m., the museum doors opened. The gala had begun. Elegant guests entered wrapped in designer coats. Diamonds shimmered beneath chandeliers. Laughter filled the marble halls. Servers carried silver trays through the crowd. Television cameras followed philanthropists, politicians, and celebrities as though they were royalty. Elaine quietly moved among them, with her cleaning cart almost invisible, exactly as Rebecca had instructed. She collected discarded napkins, removed empty glasses, straightened chairs after guests stood. Most people never looked at her. Some barely noticed she existed. She didn't mind. Then, just after 6:15, another black SUV stopped beneath the front entrance. Jonathan Bennett stepped out first. He turned immediately toward the rear passenger door. Sophia climbed out slowly, clutching the sleeve of her cream-colored coat, while staring at the enormous museum glowing with thousands of lights. It's bigger at night, she whispered. Jonathan smiled warmly. It is. He offered his hand. She took it. Together they walked toward the entrance as cameras flashed around them. For a brief moment, Jonathan forgot every board meeting, every speech, every donor waiting inside. He simply looked down at the little girl beside him. You doing okay? Sophia nodded. I'll try. You don't have to stay long. I know. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm proud of you. She smiled. I'll be brave. Neither of them noticed the sharp gust of icy wind that swept across the courtyard, just as the museum doors closed behind them. Outside, hidden beyond the illuminated sculpture garden, the warning light on the faulty outdoor heating system blinked once again before going dark completely. Inside, surrounded by music applause and glittering crystal, no one realized that the coldest place in the entire museum was quietly waiting beyond the glass doors. And before the night was over, one frightened little girl would wander there completely alone. By 7 o'clock that evening, the Bennett Winter Charity Gala had become everything Boston's social pages had promised. Music floated beneath vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across polished marble floors, waiters in white jackets glided through the crowd carrying silver trays filled with champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Television cameras followed philanthropists shaking hands beneath enormous Christmas wreaths. Laughter echoed from every gallery. Expensive perfume mingled with the scent of fresh pine and roasted herbs drifting from the banquet hall. To most people inside, it was a perfect night. Elaine Owens barely noticed any of it. She moved quietly from one room to another with a folded microfiber cloth tucked into her apron pocket and a discreet housekeeping cart waiting behind a service door. A glass left on a windowsill disappeared before anyone realized it had been there. A napkin dropped beside a marble column vanished seconds later. She had become exactly what Rebecca Collins expected: invisible. Near the orchestra, Jonathan Bennett finished another conversation with a group of donors. They praised the foundation, congratulated him on another successful fundraiser, promised additional contributions. Jonathan thanked each of them sincerely, but his eyes kept drifting toward the family lounge across the hall. Sophia had been there less than 15 minutes earlier. He had promised himself he would check on her after greeting the governor. The governor arrived late. Then came reporters. Then another interview, another handshake, another photograph. Time slipped away unnoticed. Inside the family lounge, Denise knelt beside Sophia. "You've been wonderful." Sophia smiled weakly. "Can I walk around a little?" "Only nearby." "I just want to look at the paintings." Denise checked her phone. Jonathan's assistant had sent another message requesting that she bring Sophia closer to the ballroom before Jonathan's speech. "We'll go in just a minute." Sophia nodded. She stood quietly beside the large windows overlooking the museum's sculpture garden. Outside, snowflakes drifted beneath soft garden lights. Everything looked peaceful, almost magical. A white marble angel stood at the center of the courtyard with snow gathering across its wings. Sophia smiled. "It looks like she's wearing a blanket." Denise glanced toward the window. "It does." Her phone vibrated again. This time it was Jonathan calling. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." "I need to answer." Sophia nodded obediently. "I'll stay right here." Denise stepped only a few feet into the hallway where the signal was stronger. She expected the conversation to last seconds. Instead, Jonathan began asking about revised seating arrangements after unexpected guests had arrived. While Denise spoke quietly into the phone, Sophia's attention shifted toward another window farther down the corridor. Beyond it stood the enclosed sculpture garden. Unlike the ballroom, it was nearly empty. The snow looked brighter there. The marble angel seemed closer. Curiosity gently tugged at her. She took one slow step, then another. The glass door leading into the sculpture garden stood slightly open, while maintenance workers moved equipment earlier that afternoon. Nobody had noticed it remained unlatched. Sophia slipped through without making a sound. The cold surprised her immediately. She hugged her coat tighter. "I'll only look for 1 minute," she whispered to herself. Behind her, the door slowly drifted closed. The magnetic latch clicked softly. She didn't hear it. The sculpture garden stretched farther than it appeared from inside. Stone pathways curved between bronze statues and frozen fountains, enclosed beneath towering glass walls. Snow had blown inside through rooftop ventilation panels, leaving thin white patches across the stone floor. Sophia walked toward the marble angel. "It's even prettier." She reached out to touch one cold wing. A stronger gust of wind swept through the garden. She shivered. Then she noticed something else. The warm air that usually flowed from hidden floor vents wasn't there. She remembered what her father once explained. The museum has heated pathways in winter. Not tonight. Somewhere beyond the walls, the failed heating system remained completely silent. The temperature inside the glass pavilion began falling rapidly. Back inside the ballroom, Jonathan stepped onto the stage. Applause filled the museum. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice echoed through hidden speakers, "thank you for joining us tonight." Hundreds of faces turned toward him. Nobody noticed one small child quietly missing from the audience. Denise ended her phone call. She walked back into the lounge. "Sophia." No answer. She smiled. Hiding already? She checked behind the sofa, the reading corner, the small refreshment table. Nothing. Sophia. A little louder this time. Still nothing. Her smile disappeared. She hurried into the hallway. Miss Sophia. Guests walked past, carrying champagne. Nobody had seen her. Denise searched the nearby gallery, then the gift shop, then the children's activity room prepared for younger guests. Empty. A nervous knot tightened in her stomach. She pressed the emergency button on her radio. Security. This is Denise. I can't find Miss Bennett. The response came instantly. Last known location. Family Lounge. Approximately 1 minute ago. Security officers immediately spread throughout the museum. Rebecca Collins heard the transmission. Her expression hardened. She turned toward the nearest supervisor. Lock every public exit. Search all galleries. No panic. Quietly. Within seconds, discreet earpieces crackled across the building. Elaine heard the message while polishing fingerprints from a display case near the East Gallery. Missing child. Female. 7 years old. Navy dress. Cream winter coat. Her hand stopped moving. She remembered the little girl who had asked about the lonely painting 2 days earlier. Sophia. Without thinking, she looked toward the nearby corridor. It was empty. Marcus approached, carrying another radio. You heard? Elaine nodded. I met her Thursday. Marcus frowned. Security's searching. I know. Elaine glanced toward the long hallway leading to the sculpture garden. Something didn't feel right. Most children, when frightened, moved toward people. Sophia wasn't most children. Elaine remembered the girl's quiet questions. Do museums get lonely? What if nobody's waiting? She remembered how Sophia had stood silently before snowy paintings instead of colorful ones. Children often returned to places where they had felt calm. She looked toward the glass pavilion corridor once more. Rebecca's instructions echoed inside her mind. If a child appears lost, notify security. Do not attempt to solve the situation yourself. She had already notified no one. Security was searching. Still, something deep inside refused to let her stand still. Marcus noticed her expression. What is it? I don't know. She hesitated. I think she likes quiet places. Marcus looked around. So, Elaine slowly turned toward the sculpture garden corridor. That's the quietest place in the building. Marcus followed her gaze. Security's probably already checked. Probably. She took one cautious step anyway. I'm just going to look. Elaine. It'll only take a minute. Marcus sighed. Be careful. She nodded. As Elaine walked down the increasingly silent hallway, the sounds of applause faded behind thick stone walls. The music became distant, then disappeared altogether. Only her footsteps remained. At the far end of the corridor, she noticed something unusual. One glass door wasn't fully closed. A thin ribbon of icy air slipped through the narrow opening. Elaine frowned. The museum should have felt warm. Instead, cold wrapped around her ankles like invisible water. She pushed the door open. A blast of freezing wind struck her face immediately. Snow swirled across the stone path inside the sculpture garden. The heating vents were completely dead. Hello? Her voice echoed softly. No answer. She took another careful step, then another. Far beyond the marble angel half hidden behind a snow-covered sculpture, she thought she saw the smallest movement, a tiny cream-colored sleeve. Elaine's heart stopped. Sophia. The little figure didn't answer. She only curled tighter into herself as another bitter gust swept through the silent garden. Elaine hurried across the frozen stone pathway, her black work shoes slipping slightly on the thin layer of snow. that had blown into the sculpture garden. "Sophia?" Her voice echoed softly beneath the glass ceiling. No answer. Only the mournful whistle of winter wind pushing through the silent pavilion. The little girl remained curled beside the marble angel, her knees pulled tightly against her chest. Her cream-colored coat had collected snow along the shoulders, and her tiny hands clutched the sleeves instead of her gloves. Elaine reached her in seconds. "Oh, sweetheart." She immediately knelt. Sophia's lips trembled violently. Her breathing came in quick, shallow bursts. The little girl's fingers were stiff with cold. Elaine gently touched one small hand. It felt like ice. Her heart lurched. "Sophia." "It's Elaine." The little girl slowly opened her eyes. For a second, confusion clouded her face. Then recognition flickered. "The painting lady?" Elaine smiled, despite the fear rising inside her. "Yes. I'm here." Sophia tried to speak, but her teeth chattered so hard that only broken sounds escaped. Elaine quickly looked around. There wasn't another person anywhere in sight. The garden seemed completely deserted. She reached for the radio clipped to her belt. Before pressing the button, she removed one glove and gently rubbed warmth back into Sophia's frozen fingers. "Stay with me. I've got you." Sophia blinked slowly. "I can't feel." "I know. You don't have to talk." Elaine pressed the emergency button. "This is housekeeping. I've found Miss Bennett." The radio exploded with voices. "Location?" "Sculpture garden. She's suffering from severe cold exposure. Send medical staff immediately. We're on our way." The transmission ended. Elaine looked back at Sophia. The child was still shaking uncontrollably. Her coat, though beautiful, wasn't thick enough for the freezing temperature. Elaine glanced toward the silent floor vents. Nothing. No heat. She placed one hand above the nearest vent. Cold air. The heating system had completely failed. She knew enough about hypothermia from long hospital nights beside Ava to recognize the danger. Waiting wasn't enough. She had to warm the child now. Without hesitation, Elaine unzipped her own housekeeping jacket. The December air struck her immediately. She ignored it. Sophia looked at her weakly. "What are you?" Elaine smiled. "Borrowing some warmth?" She slipped the heavy charcoal gray uniform jacket off her shoulders and carefully wrapped it around Sophia. The sleeves were far too long. The fabric still carried Elaine's body heat from hours of work. Sophia instinctively pulled it closer. "It smells." Elaine laughed softly. "Probably like floor polish." The little girl managed the tiniest smile. "No. It smells safe." The single word pierced Elaine's heart. She swallowed hard, but it wasn't enough. The freezing wind continued sweeping through the pavilion. Elaine reached into the breast pocket of the discarded jacket. Her fingers found the familiar folded cloth, the navy blue handkerchief, the one embroidered with a silver star. For one long second, she simply stared at it. 8 years disappeared. Hospital monitors, Christmas lights outside a children's ward. A tiny voice asking, "Mommy, will I still see snow next year?" Ava's small hands wrapped inside hers, the folded handkerchief resting beneath a hospital pillow. The last gift her daughter had touched. Elaine closed her eyes, then gently unfolded the cloth. The silver star shimmered beneath the pale garden lights. She carefully wrapped the handkerchief around Sophia's neck, covering every inch of exposed skin she could. "There. That's better." Sophia looked down. The star. "My mommy used to—" Elaine stopped herself. "Not Mommy, Ava." She smiled gently. "It belonged to someone very special." Sophia touched the embroidered thread carefully with trembling fingers. It's pretty. It is. Another violent gust swept across the garden. Elaine immediately moved closer. Without thinking, she sat directly on the frozen stone beside Sophia and wrapped both arms around the little girl. Her own thin blouse offered almost no protection against the cold anymore. Within seconds, she felt the freezing air biting through the fabric. She ignored it completely. She tucked Sophia against her shoulder. There. Let me help keep you warm. Sophia rested her head against Elaine almost automatically. Children recognized safety before they understood why. Elaine rubbed slow circles across the little girl's back. Breathe with me. In and out. Sophia tried. Her breathing gradually steadied. The violent shaking remained. Elaine remembered another winter, another hospital room, another little body trembling beneath blankets despite every heater the nurses could find. She blinked rapidly. Not now. She couldn't cry now. Sophia whispered, in trouble? No. You didn't do anything wrong. I got lost. I know. They're looking for you. Sophia nodded weakly. I didn't want Daddy to worry. He already does. The little girl looked up. Really? Very much. Silence settled between them. Snowflakes drifted through the open ventilation gaps high above. The museum music felt impossibly far away. Elaine tightened the jacket around Sophia. Her own fingers had begun growing numb. She barely noticed. Instead, she spoke softly, almost unconsciously. The same sentence that had guided her life for years. No child should ever feel cold and alone. Sophia looked at her. What? Elaine smiled. It's something I believe. The little girl rested her cheek against Elaine's shoulder again. I like it. Several corridors away, security officers sprinted through the museum. Rebecca Collins barked instructions into her headset. Medical team to the sculpture garden. Move. Jonathan Bennett stepped down from the stage in the middle of thunderous applause. One security officer reached him before anyone else. Mr. Bennett. Jonathan immediately saw the expression on the man's face. His stomach dropped. My daughter. We've located her. Jonathan didn't wait for another word. He ran. Guests stared in confusion as one of Boston's most composed businessmen sprinted through the museum without explanation. His polished shoes echoed across marble floors. He ignored every curious glance, ignored reporters calling his name, ignored cameras. There was only one thing that mattered. Sophia. Back inside the sculpture garden, Elaine could feel herself beginning to shiver. Her blouse was no match for the icy air. Still, she kept both arms around Sophia. She gently rubbed warmth into the little girl's shoulders. Can you tell me something? Sophia nodded faintly. What's your teddy bear's name? A tiny smile appeared. Mr. Buttons. That's an excellent name. He gets scared. So do I. Sophia blinked. You. Everybody gets scared. Even grown-ups. What do you do? Elaine looked toward the falling snow. I remember that scary moments don't last forever. Sophia thought about that. Then asked quietly, Did somebody tell you that? Elaine smiled sadly. My little girl did. The words escaped before she realized it. Sophia looked at her gently. Where is she? Elaine stared at the silver star wrapped around Sophia's neck. She's still with me. She placed one hand softly over the little girl's heart. Just differently. Sophia didn't completely understand, but somehow she understood enough. She slowly lifted both tiny arms despite the cold, then wrapped them around Elaine's neck. The unexpected hug shattered the last wall Elaine had carefully built around her grief. She closed her eyes. For one impossible heartbeat, it felt exactly like holding Ava again. Tears quietly slipped down her cheeks. She whispered through a trembling smile, "You're going to be okay." "I promise." Sophia buried her face deeper into Elaine's shoulder. The warmth, the heartbeat, the gentle scent of soap and clean cotton, everything reminded her of memories she could barely remember from before Evelyn had died. Without thinking, without planning, without even opening her eyes, she whispered the one word her lonely heart had been searching for long before she ever entered the frozen garden. "Mom!" At that exact moment, Jonathan Bennett reached the glass doors. He stopped, unable to move, unable to breathe. Through the frosted glass, he saw a housekeeping maid sitting on the freezing stone floor, wearing only a thin blouse, her uniform wrapped around his daughter, her faded navy handkerchief with its tiny silver star protecting Sophia's neck, while the little girl clung to her as though she had finally found home. Jonathan stood motionless. Tears slowly filled his eyes before he even realized he was crying. For several endless seconds, Jonathan Bennett remained frozen outside the glass doors. Everything beyond the glass seemed strangely silent. His daughter sat wrapped inside the uniform of a housekeeping employee. The woman herself wore nothing but a thin blouse despite the brutal cold. Snow drifted slowly around them. Sophia's small arms remained tightly around the stranger's neck. Jonathan had expected to find panic. Instead, he found tenderness. The sight struck him harder than any speech he had ever heard. Then instinct finally overcame shock. He shoved the glass door open. "Sophia." His voice echoed through the sculpture garden. Sophia lifted her head weakly. "Daddy." Jonathan crossed the frozen pathway in seconds and dropped to his knees beside them. "Oh, sweetheart." He reached toward his daughter but paused. Sophia instinctively tightened her hold on Elaine for one brief moment before realizing who had arrived. Elaine gently stroked the little girl's back. "It's okay. Your daddy's here." Only then did Sophia slowly loosen her embrace. Jonathan gathered her carefully into his arms. She was trembling violently. He immediately wrapped his expensive wool overcoat around both of them. "You're freezing." Sophia looked up with tired eyes. "I got lost." "I know. I'm here now." Medical personnel burst into the garden moments later carrying blankets and emergency equipment. Rebecca Collins arrived immediately behind them, followed by Marcus Hill Denise and several security officers. Everyone stopped for a fraction of a second. Not because of Sophia, because of Elaine. She was still kneeling on the frozen stone wearing only her light blouse. Her hands had turned pale from the cold. Snowflakes rested in her dark hair. Yet the first words out of her mouth were not about herself. "Please check her hands first. The heating failed. She was out here longer than I know." The lead paramedic immediately examined Sophia. "Pulse is good. She's cold, but she's responsive." He wrapped heated blankets around the little girl while another medic checked her temperature. A second paramedic turned toward Elaine. "Ma'am, we need to examine you too." Elaine shook her head gently. "I'm fine." Marcus stepped forward. "No, you're not." Only then did she realize how violently she herself had begun shivering. The adrenaline that had kept her warm was fading. The paramedic draped another thermal blanket across Elaine's shoulders. As he adjusted it, the navy handkerchief slipped from around Sophia's neck onto the snow-covered stone. Jonathan noticed immediately. The little silver star caught the garden lights. He bent down and carefully picked it up. "This belongs to you." Elaine looked towards the cloth. "Yes." Sophia immediately spoke. "No. It's mine." Everyone looked at her. Elaine smiled softly. "I only loaned it to you." Sophia clutched Jonathan's sleeve. "Can I keep it a little longer?" Elaine's eyes lingered on the faded embroidery. For years she had believed she would never let another person touch it. Yet seeing it around Sophia's neck had somehow felt right. She nodded. "Of course." Jonathan watched the exchange silently. The handkerchief was old. The edges were worn. The stitching had been repaired several times. It was obviously precious. Yet this woman had wrapped it around a frightened child, without hesitation. He looked down at his own daughter. Sophia still refused to remove the cloth from around her neck. Rebecca finally stepped forward. "Mr. Bennet, I sincerely apologize. This should never have happened." Jonathan barely looked at her. "Why wasn't the heating working?" Rebecca hesitated. "We're still investigating." A maintenance supervisor hurried over. "Sir, the sensor failed this afternoon. We believed it only affected one section." Jonathan's voice remained calm, dangerously calm. "And no one verified it before guests arrived." Nobody answered. Silence filled the garden. Finally, Jonathan looked back toward Elaine. "What is your name?" "Elaine Owens." "You stayed with her the entire time?" Elaine nodded. "I couldn't leave her alone." "You took off your uniform." "She needed it more." Jonathan looked directly into her eyes. "You could have become seriously ill." Elaine answered as though the question hardly mattered. "She was 7. The simplicity of the answer silenced everyone. Marcus quietly looked away. Denise covered her mouth. Even Rebecca lowered her eyes. Jonathan stared at Elaine for several long moments. He had spent decades surrounded by people who measured everything: time, money, risk, reputation. This woman had measured only one thing: a frightened child. Sophia reached one hand toward Elaine. "Will you come too?" Elaine blinked. "Where, sweetheart?" "Inside." "I don't want you to stay cold." Jonathan looked between them, then extended his own hand toward Elaine. "Please, come inside." Elaine hesitated. "My shift," Rebecca interrupted immediately. "Your shift is over." Marcus looked surprised. Rebecca herself seemed surprised by the words. Elaine slowly stood. Her legs nearly gave way. The paramedic steadied her. "You've lost a lot of body heat. You need to warm up." Together, they began walking back toward the museum. As soon as the glass doors opened, warm air rushed over them. Guests standing nearby immediately noticed something unusual. The chairman of the Bennett Foundation wasn't returning alone. He walked beside a housekeeping maid wrapped in an emergency blanket. His daughter refused to let go of the woman's hand. Whispers spread almost instantly. "What happened? Who is she? Is the child okay?" Television cameras instinctively turned toward the commotion. Security quickly blocked their view. Jonathan ignored every question. He escorted Elaine and Sophia directly toward the private medical suite, prepared for VIP emergencies. Inside, doctors completed a thorough examination. Fortunately, Sophia's body temperature had begun rising. Elaine's condition proved only slightly better. The physician looked sternly at her. "You should have protected yourself." Elaine smiled faintly. "I did." The doctor frowned. "You were wearing a blouse in below-freezing temperatures." Elaine glanced toward Sophia. "I wasn't alone." The physician understood immediately. He said nothing else. After another 20 minutes, Sophia sat comfortably beneath thick blankets, sipping warm hot chocolate. Color slowly returned to her cheeks. Elaine wore a spare wool sweater borrowed from the museum's Lost and Found office. It was several sizes too large. Marcus knocked gently before entering. "I brought your things." He handed Elaine her folded uniform. She carefully checked the breast pocket. Empty? Then remembered. The handkerchief. Sophia noticed immediately. She untied it from around her own neck. "I'm sorry. I forgot." Elaine accepted it carefully. The cloth felt warm, still carrying Sophia's body heat. She folded it gently. Before placing it away, Sophia touched the embroidered silver star one last time. It kept me warm. Elaine smiled. I think you helped it. Marcus quietly cleared his throat. There are, he glanced toward the hallway, quite a few important people asking about you. Elaine looked confused. Me? Yes. And Mr. Bennet asked that no one let you leave. Elaine frowned slightly. I still have cleaning supplies to return. Marcus laughed despite himself. Only you would think about that tonight. Before Elaine could answer, another gentle knock sounded. Jonathan Bennet entered alone. He had removed his tuxedo jacket. His tie hung slightly loose. For the first time that evening, he looked less like one of Boston's most powerful businessmen and more like an exhausted father. He stopped in front of Elaine. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Jonathan did something that stunned everyone in the room. He bowed his head slightly. Mrs. Owens, my daughter is alive tonight because you chose compassion over comfort. There are no words large enough to thank you. Elaine shook her head gently. You don't owe me thanks. I only did what anyone should do. Jonathan looked at her with quiet certainty. No. They should. But not everyone does. Sophia slipped off the examination bed and walked slowly toward Elaine. Without asking permission, she reached for Elaine's hand again. This time Elaine held it naturally, as though it had always belonged there. Standing quietly in the doorway, Rebecca Collins watched the scene unfold. For the first time in years, the event schedule donor list's perfect decorations and flawless logistics suddenly seemed painfully insignificant, because the most unforgettable moment of the entire gala had not happened beneath crystal chandeliers or on a brightly lit stage. It had happened on a freezing stone floor, where a woman everyone had been instructed to treat as invisible quietly reminded an entire room what real charity actually looked like. The gala officially resumed less than an hour later. The orchestra returned to its music. Guests resumed their conversations. Servers once again carried silver trays through glittering halls. From a distance, everything appeared perfectly normal. But beneath the polished surface, something fundamental had changed. The story, quietly passing from guest to guest, was no longer about the record-breaking donations. It was about the housekeeping maid. Did you hear, Day? She took off her own uniform. She stayed in the freezing garden. Mr. Bennet personally thanked her. Every whispered version grew slightly different. Only one detail remained the same. Everyone spoke about Elaine Owens. Elaine herself wished they wouldn't. She stood inside the employee break room, carefully folding the oversized borrowed sweater before returning it to a volunteer. Marcus leaned against the doorway. You've become the most famous person at the gala. Elaine laughed awkwardly. I cleaned 3 bathrooms today. That's hardly famous. Marcus shook his head. You still don't understand. I'm not sure I want to. She picked up her worn housekeeping jacket. The fabric had finally dried after warming beside a portable heater. She ran her hand across one sleeve. The sleeve Sophia had hidden inside while trying to stay warm. Marcus watched quietly. You thinking about her? Elaine nodded. She reminds me a little of Ava. Marcus lowered his eyes. He had known Elaine long enough to recognize how rarely she spoke her daughter's name aloud. I'm glad you said it. Elaine smiled sadly. I haven't stopped thinking about Ava since I held Sophia. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Marcus asked gently, Does it hurt? Elaine considered the question carefully. Yes. Less than before. But differently. Marcus understood. Grief never truly disappeared. It only learned quieter ways of existing. A soft knock interrupted them. Rebecca Collins stood outside the break room. She looked almost uncomfortable. Mrs. Owens? Elaine stood immediately. Yes. Miss Collins? May I speak with you? Marcus quietly excused himself. Rebecca waited until he disappeared down the hallway before speaking again. I've reviewed the security recordings. Elaine remained silent. Rebecca clasped both hands together. You ignored my direct instructions. Elaine nodded honestly. I did. You left your assigned area. Yes. You entered the sculpture garden without waiting for security. Yes. Rebecca paused. In any other circumstance. She stopped herself. Elaine expected a formal reprimand, perhaps even suspension. Instead, Rebecca took a slow breath. I've spent 15 years organizing charity events. My job has always been preventing problems. Elaine listened quietly. I believed following procedures was the highest form of responsibility. Rebecca looked directly into Elaine's eyes. Tonight, you reminded me that compassion sometimes arrives before procedure. Elaine blinked in surprise. Rebecca gave the faintest smile. It was small, almost uncertain. I owe you an apology. Elaine looked genuinely confused. For what? For believing invisible work meant invisible people. Silence filled the room. Rebecca slowly extended her hand. Elaine accepted it. Their handshake lasted only seconds. Yet Marcus, watching unnoticed from the hallway, knew he had just witnessed something he never expected to see. Rebecca Collins had changed. Not completely, but enough. Meanwhile, in the museum's private family suite, Jonathan sat beside Sophia while she finished another cup of hot chocolate. The little girl looked much stronger now. Her cheeks had regained their color. Only occasional shivers remained. Jonathan brushed a loose curl away from her forehead. Feeling better? Sophia nodded. Can I ask something? Anything. Is Miss Elaine going home now? Probably. Sophia looked disappointed. I wanted to say thank you again. You already did. I know. But not enough. Jonathan smiled. What would be enough? Sophia thought carefully. I don't know. I just don't want her to be lonely. The words landed with unexpected weight. Jonathan remembered seeing the simple apartment address listed on the employee emergency form. Widow. No immediate family. Emergency contact Marcus Hill. Nothing else. He looked back at Sophia. What makes you think she's lonely? Her eyes. Jonathan frowned slightly. What about them? They smile. But sometimes they forget. Jonathan stared at his daughter. Children noticed things adults overlooked. He had built an entire career evaluating balance sheets and investment reports. Yet Sophia could read sorrow from a stranger's eyes after knowing her for less than an hour. Denise entered quietly. The doctors have cleared her. Jonathan nodded. Good. He remained thoughtful for another moment before standing. I'll be right back. He walked toward the hallway where one of his assistants waited. I need information. Yes, sir. The employee. Elaine Owens. I want her personnel file. The assistant nodded immediately. Tonight. Now. 20 minutes later, Jonathan sat alone inside a small conference room, reading through a thin folder. Far thinner than he expected. Employment history, attendance, performance evaluations. Perfect. Never late. Never disciplined. Several commendations from coworkers. Nothing remarkable. Until the final page. Emergency background information voluntarily provided by employee. Widowed. One deceased daughter. Ava Owens, age 7, congenital heart disease. Jonathan read the final line twice, then a third time. Age 7, exactly Sophia's age. He slowly closed the folder. Suddenly, everything made painful sense. The jacket, the handkerchief, the embrace, the tears he had glimpsed on Elaine's face before she quickly wiped them away. She hadn't simply protected a frightened child for a few impossible minutes. She had held the daughter she had lost. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. He remembered something Evelyn had often said. The people carrying the deepest pain usually recognize it first in someone else. He finally understood what she meant. At the employee exit, Elaine zipped her coat before stepping outside. The snowfall had become gentler. Streetlights reflected softly across fresh white sidewalks. She checked the time. Nearly 10:30. The last bus home would arrive in 12 minutes. Marcus walked beside her carrying her canvas lunch bag. "You forgot your cookie?" Elaine laughed. "I completely forgot dinner." Marcus handed her the wrapped oatmeal cookie. "You'll make Mrs. Delgado happy." They reached the bus stop together. For several moments, they simply watched snow drifting beneath the yellow streetlights. Marcus finally spoke. "You know, I've worked 39 years. I've seen people donate millions. I've seen politicians give speeches. I've seen celebrities cry in front of cameras." He looked toward Elaine. "I've never seen anything like what happened tonight." Elaine shrugged gently. "I didn't think. I just remembered." "Remembered what?" She looked at the falling snow. "What it feels like to be a frightened child." The city bus pulled toward the curb. Its doors opened with a familiar hiss. Elaine smiled. "I'll see you Monday." Marcus nodded. "Good night." She climbed aboard. Neither of them noticed a black sedan parked quietly across the street. Jonathan Bennett sat inside, without saying a word. He had followed at a respectful distance after learning Elaine took the city bus home. Not to investigate, not to judge, simply because he wanted to understand the woman who had risked herself for his daughter, without expecting anything in return. He watched Elaine choose an ordinary window seat near the back. No special treatment, no celebration, no reporters. Just another tired woman carrying an old canvas lunch bag after finishing work. The bus pulled away. Jonathan remained where he was. His driver glanced into the rearview mirror. "Home, sir?" Jonathan looked toward the disappearing bus. "No, follow it." The driver hesitated only briefly. "Yes, sir." Neither man spoke during the quiet drive through snowy Boston streets. Jonathan watched from a distance as the city slowly changed. Luxury neighborhoods disappeared. Office towers gave way to aging brick apartment buildings, small grocery stores, corner laundromats, modest diners preparing to close for the night. Finally, the bus stopped in South Boston. Elaine stepped onto the sidewalk alone. She walked 3 blocks carrying her lunch bag beneath gently falling snow before unlocking the front door of an aging apartment building. One hallway light flickered. The front steps needed repair. She disappeared inside. Jonathan remained seated in silence. "This is where she lives." "Yes, sir." Jonathan looked up toward the third-floor window, where one small lamp turned on moments later. No mansion, no luxury, no recognition. Just a quiet apartment where a woman who had saved his daughter would spend another ordinary night alone. He remembered the enormous ballroom still filled with guests celebrating generosity. Then he looked toward the dim apartment window glowing softly against the winter darkness. For the first time in many years, Jonathan realized that the greatest act of charity he had witnessed all evening had never appeared on the fundraising program, and he quietly decided that this remarkable woman would never again be invisible. Elaine did not realize she was being followed. After climbing the 3 flights of narrow stairs, she unlocked apartment 3C and stepped inside as quietly as always. The familiar silence welcomed her. A tiny living room. A worn brown sofa repaired twice with careful stitching. A bookshelf filled with second-hand novels. An old kitchen table positioned beside the window. Everything was exactly where she had left it that morning. She hung her coat beside the door, then stopped. The apartment suddenly felt much quieter than usual. Holding Sophia had awakened memories she had spent years teaching herself to carry gently. Now they returned all at once. She walked slowly toward a small wooden cabinet. On top sat a framed photograph. A little black girl with bright eyes and braided pigtails smiled at the camera while proudly holding a paper snowflake. Ava. Elaine picked up the frame. You would have liked her. Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. She asked so many questions. The apartment remained silent. Elaine smiled sadly. Just like you. She touched the photograph with one finger. I kept my promise today. No child felt cold and alone. A tear slipped quietly down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. Across the street, Jonathan Bennett remained inside the parked sedan. The third-floor window glowed warmly against the snowy night. He had expected a large family, friends, someone waiting for Elaine to come home. Instead, only one light turned on, then another, nothing else. His driver finally spoke. Sir, ye. Jonathan remained looking towards the apartment. Go home. The driver hesitated. And you? I'll drive myself. The driver understood better than to argue. 10 minutes later, Jonathan sat alone behind the wheel of his own SUV. He should have returned to the gala. Guests were still there. The auction still continued. Board members would certainly ask where he had disappeared, yet none of it seemed important anymore. He quietly started the engine and drove home through gently falling snow. The Bennett mansion, usually bright with holiday decorations, felt strangely empty when he arrived. Denise had already tucked Sophia into bed. Jonathan climbed the staircase and gently pushed open her bedroom door. A small bedside lamp remained on. Sophia was still awake. I knew you'd come. Jonathan smiled. You always know. She lifted one corner of her blanket. Shine? Come sit. He did. For several moments, they simply listened to the wind outside. Finally, Sophia asked, Did Miss Elaine get home? Jonathan looked surprised. I think so. You checked? He nodded honestly. Yes. Why? Jonathan searched for the right answer. Because I wanted to know if someone was waiting for her. Sophia looked down. Were they? No. The little girl became quiet. After a while, she whispered, That makes me sad. Jonathan brushed her hair gently away from her forehead. It makes me sad, too. Sophia looked toward her nightstand. The silver star handkerchief lay folded neatly beside Mr. Button's. Jonathan noticed it immediately. I thought you gave that back. I did. Miss Elaine said I could borrow it until tomorrow. Jonathan picked it up carefully. The cloth had been repaired by hand many times. Each stitch was slightly different. Someone had loved it enough never to throw it away. He unfolded it completely. Inside one corner, almost hidden beneath faded thread, were tiny embroidered initials. A.O. Jonathan frowned. Ava Owens. He whispered the name almost unconsciously. Sophia looked at him. Who's Ava? Jonathan remained silent for a moment, then answered softly. Miss Elaine's daughter. The little girl who died. Yes. Sophia reached for the handkerchief again. She shared it with me. Jonathan nodded. She did. Even though it was Ava's? Yes. Sophia carefully hugged the folded cloth against her chest. She must have loved Ava very much. Jonathan's voice became quiet. I think she still does. Sophia thought about that. Can you love somebody after they die? Jonathan smiled sadly. I don't think love knows how to stop. The little girl seemed satisfied with the answer. A few minutes later, she finally fell asleep. Still holding the little blue handkerchief, Jonathan remained sitting beside the bed long after her breathing became slow and peaceful. His thoughts wandered back to another hospital room years earlier, Evelyn's final days. She had once squeezed his hand and whispered, if kindness ever saves Sophia someday. Promise me you'll recognize it." He had promised. Tonight he intended to keep that promise. Sunday morning arrived bright and cold. Elaine woke before sunrise, out of habit. For one blissful second, she forgot everything. Then memories of the previous night returned. The frozen sculpture garden, Sophia, Jonathan, the overwhelming attention. She groaned softly into her pillow. "I hope Monday is normal." After making coffee, she called Mrs. Delgado downstairs. The elderly neighbor answered cheerfully. "My hero," Elaine laughed. "Please don't start." "The television already did." Elaine froze. "Television?" Mrs. Delgado sounded delighted. "They showed the gala this morning." "They didn't mention your name." "But everyone keeps talking about the mysterious maid." Elaine closed her eyes. "Oh dear. You should be proud." "I'd rather buy groceries quietly." Mrs. Delgado laughed. "You've always been impossible." After hanging up, Elaine spent the morning doing laundry, paying bills, and preparing meals for the week. She deliberately avoided the news. Normal life felt comforting. Around noon, someone knocked on her apartment door. She assumed it was Mrs. Delgado borrowing sugar again. Instead, Marcus stood outside holding a bakery box. "I come bearing peace offerings." Elaine smiled. "Cinnamon rolls." "Fresh." He entered. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and laundry soap. Marcus looked around as he had dozens of times before. Nothing had changed. Except one thing. The framed photograph of Ava now stood beside the window instead of hidden on the cabinet. You moved her." Elaine nodded. "I don't know why. I just wanted more sunlight." Marcus smiled gently. She would have liked that. They shared coffee in comfortable silence. Eventually, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. "I almost forgot." He handed Elaine a sealed cream-colored envelope. "No return address. It arrived at the museum this morning. For you." Elaine turned the envelope over. Heavy stationery, elegant handwriting. Only 3 words appeared on the front. Mrs. Elaine Owens. Nothing more. She slowly opened it. Inside rested a simple folded note. No company logo, no business letter, just a handwritten message. "Mrs. Owens, my daughter asked me a question last night that I have been unable to stop thinking about. She asked whether someone was waiting for you when you came home. I realized I did not know the answer. If you would allow us, Sophia and I would like to invite you to lunch this Tuesday. Not as your employer, not as a donor. Simply as a grateful father and a little girl who wishes to thank the woman who reminded her what warmth truly feels like. With sincere gratitude, Jonathan Bennett Elaine read the letter twice. Then a third time. Marcus watched quietly. "What is it?" She handed him the note. After reading it, Marcus smiled. "I think someone's life is about to change." Elaine looked out the window toward the softly falling snow. She wasn't thinking about billionaires, or elegant lunches, or impossible opportunities. She was thinking about one little girl who had clung to her in the cold and whispered a single heartbreaking word. Somehow, deep inside, she knew that the frozen night at the museum had not been the end of their story. It had only been the beginning. Tuesday morning arrived, wrapped in brilliant winter sunshine. Fresh snow covered the rooftops of Boston, softening the sharp edges of brick buildings and busy streets. Elaine stood in front of her bedroom mirror longer than usual. She owned only 3 outfits suitable for going anywhere besides work. A navy cardigan with slightly faded sleeves, a cream blouse she wore to church, dark gray slacks pressed carefully the night before. She chose the cream blouse. Not because it looked elegant, because Ava had once told her it made her smile look brighter. Elaine gently fastened the final button and looked at herself. "You'll be fine." She wasn't convinced. Lunch with one of the wealthiest men in Massachusetts felt completely outside her world. She picked up her purse, then paused beside the cabinet. The framed photograph of Ava smiled back at her. Elaine touched the corner of the frame. "Wish me luck." As always, the apartment answered with silence, yet somehow she felt less alone. Across the city, Sophia had been awake since dawn. She had already changed outfits twice. Denise laughed while brushing her hair. "You've never been this excited for lunch." Sophia grinned. "I want Miss Elaine to like the surprise." Denise glanced toward the small paper gift bag sitting on the bed. "You're sure you don't want me to look?" "No." "It's a secret." Jonathan entered the room carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Who's keeping secrets?" Sophia immediately hid the bag behind her back. "Daddy," he laughed. "I understand. I'll pretend I never saw anything." The little girl climbed onto his lap. "Are you nervous?" Jonathan smiled. "A little." "You?" Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "What if she says no?" Jonathan looked surprised. "To lunch?" "No. To being my friend." Jonathan kissed the top of her head. "I don't think kindness says no very often." At 11:50, a black sedan stopped quietly outside a small neighborhood restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor. It was not one of Jonathan's luxury hotels, not an exclusive private club. Instead, he had chosen a warm, family-owned restaurant Evelyn had loved years earlier. She used to tell him, "The best conversations happen where nobody is trying to impress anyone." He hoped she had been right. Elaine arrived by bus. She stepped onto the sidewalk carrying a simple brown handbag. She stopped for a moment after recognizing Jonathan waiting outside instead of inside. He had come out to greet her personally. "Mrs. Owens?" "Mr. Bennett." He smiled warmly. "Please." "Jonathan." She hesitated. "Only if you call me Elaine." "I'd like that." Before either could say another word, the restaurant door burst open. "Miss Elaine?" Sophia ran outside, despite Denise calling after her. Elaine instinctively opened her arms. The little girl hugged her tightly. "You came." "I promised." "I know." "I was still worried." Elaine laughed softly. "I've noticed you worry quite a bit." Sophia looked completely serious. "Important people are worth worrying about." The unexpected sentence caught everyone by surprise. Jonathan exchanged a quiet glance with Denise. Neither had taught Sophia to speak that way. Inside the restaurant, the owner quietly led them to a private corner overlooking the harbor. No reporters, no photographers, no business associates, only 4 people sharing lunch together. The atmosphere remained slightly awkward during the first few minutes. Elaine carefully folded her napkin. Jonathan stirred his coffee without drinking it. Sophia solved the problem herself. She reached into the paper gift bag hidden beneath her chair. "I made something." Elaine blinked. "For me?" Sophia nodded proudly. "I finished it yesterday." She carefully lifted out a small wooden picture frame painted light blue. Tiny silver stars covered every corner. Inside rested a simple drawing made with colored pencils. 3 people stood beneath falling snow. 1 tall woman, 1 little girl, 1 man standing beside them. Above the drawing, written in careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "The warmest day of winter." Elaine stared silently at the picture, her vision blurred. "You made this?" Sophia nodded. "So you won't forget me?" Elaine laughed through tears. "Oh, sweetheart. I don't think forgetting you was ever possible." She carefully held the frame as though it were made of glass. Jonathan watched quietly. He had purchased paintings worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. None had ever seemed more valuable than the drawing in Elaine's hands. Lunch arrived. Warm soup, fresh bread, roasted chicken. Conversation gradually became easier. Jonathan learned that Elaine loved mystery novels. Elaine discovered Sophia hated broccoli with remarkable consistency. Sophia proudly announced that Jonathan still burned pancakes every Saturday. "I only burned them twice." Sophia counted on her fingers. 5. Jonathan sighed dramatically. I've been outvoted. Laughter filled the table. For the first time in years, Jonathan realized he was laughing without forcing himself. After dessert arrived, the conversation naturally slowed. Jonathan finally looked toward Elaine. I hope you don't mind if I ask you something. Of course. The handkerchief. Elaine gently touched her purse. She had brought it with her. It belonged to Ava. Jonathan nodded. I guessed. Elaine slowly removed the neatly folded navy cloth. The silver star remained faded but beautiful. Ava embroidered this star herself. Jonathan looked surprised. She did, with a nurse helping. She insisted every blanket needed a star because stars help people find home. Sophia listened carefully. Elaine smiled faintly. She wasn't very good at sewing. They all laughed gently. The stitches were crooked. I wanted to fix them. But Ava wouldn't let me. She said, Elaine paused, perfect stars only belong in the sky. Silence settled over the table. Sophia reached toward the handkerchief with great care. So this is Ava's star. Elaine nodded. Yes. The little girl thought for a long moment, then asked the question adults often avoided. Do you still miss her every day? Jonathan quietly looked down. Elaine considered pretending. Instead, she answered honestly. Yes. Every single day. Sophia nodded slowly. I still miss my mommy every day, too. For several seconds, neither spoke. Two people, 141, 17, united by the same invisible ache. Finally, Sophia whispered, Do you think they're friends? Elaine smiled gently. Who? Our moms. Jonathan started to correct her. Elaine wasn't Sophia's mother. Then he stopped. The question wasn't about biology. It was about hope. Elaine looked out across the winter harbor. I think kind hearts usually find each other. Sophia smiled with quiet satisfaction. I think so too. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. He watched the interaction unfolding naturally between them. Nothing felt forced. Elaine never tried to replace Evelyn. Sophia never tried to replace Ava. Yet together, they somehow created space where grief no longer felt quite so lonely. When lunch ended, Jonathan asked Denise to take Sophia outside for a few minutes to feed the harbor pigeons. The little girl happily agreed. Now only Jonathan and Elaine remained at the table. He folded his hands. There is something else I'd like to discuss. Elaine looked attentive. I've been thinking about the museum. So have I. Jonathan smiled. I doubt for the same reason. She laughed softly. Probably not. His expression became more serious. Our foundation supports children's hospitals, shelters, and schools. Elaine nodded. I know. But I've realized something. We spend millions designing programs. Yet sometimes we overlook the people already living our mission every day. Elaine remained silent. He continued. I don't believe what happened Saturday should simply become a nice story people forget. Elaine looked slightly uncomfortable. I wasn't trying to become a story. I know. That's exactly why it matters. He paused. I'd like to ask for your help. Elaine frowned in confusion. My help? Jonathan nodded. Not today. Not immediately. But I have an idea. One I haven't fully figured out yet. He smiled. And before making any decisions, I want to ask one very important question. Elaine waited. Jonathan looked directly into her eyes. If there were a way for the kindness you showed Sophia that night to reach thousands of other children, would you be willing to consider it? Elaine lowered her eyes to the little blue picture frame resting beside her plate. She thought about Ava. about lonely children, about cold nights, about promises. She wasn't yet sure what Jonathan meant, but she already knew one thing. If another child somewhere could be spared even a fraction of the loneliness Ava had endured, she would at least listen. Elaine spent the next several days trying to return to her ordinary routine. She reported to work before sunrise. She cleaned patient rooms. She polished hallway floors. She exchanged quiet greetings with nurses arriving for early shifts. On the surface, nothing had changed. Yet people had begun looking at her differently. Some recognized her from the museum. Others had heard the story from co-workers. A young volunteer stopped her one morning. "Mrs. Owens?" Elaine looked up. "Yes. I just wanted to say," the college student hesitated. "My little sister was in the hospital for almost a year. There was a housekeeper who always brought her extra coloring pages. I never learned her name. But what you did reminded me of her." Elaine smiled warmly. "I'm glad your sister had someone kind." "So am I." The volunteer walked away. Elaine stood still for a moment. She wondered how many quiet acts of kindness happened every day without anyone ever knowing. Probably thousands. Later that afternoon, Jonathan Bennett stood before the monthly meeting of the Bennett Foundation's executive board. A massive screen displayed charts, donation reports, grant projections, budget forecasts. The board members waited for him to begin. Instead of discussing numbers, Jonathan placed one object on the polished conference table: the faded navy blue handkerchief with the silver star. Several executives exchanged puzzled glances. Jonathan spoke quietly. "Does anyone know what this is worth?" Silence. One finance director answered carefully. "Sentimentally?" "I couldn't estimate." Jonathan nodded. "Financially, almost nothing." Jonathan looked around the room. "Last Saturday night, this cloth saved my daughter's life." The room became perfectly still. He briefly told them what had happened in the sculpture garden. No exaggeration, no dramatic language, just the facts. When he finished, one trustee finally spoke. "What are you proposing?" Jonathan looked toward the large windows overlooking the city. "Our foundation has invested millions in buildings, millions in equipment, millions in research, and we should continue." He paused. "But compassion cannot be purchased. It can only be recognized." He turned back toward the board. "I want to establish a new initiative." One executive frowned. "What kind?" Jonathan answered without hesitation. "The Silver Star Initiative." He gently touched the embroidered cloth. "It will honor ordinary workers across hospitals, shelters, schools, and community organizations whose quiet acts of compassion change lives." The board members listened attentively. Jonathan continued. "Not celebrities. Not executives. Not people seeking recognition. The invisible people. The ones who choose kindness when nobody is watching." A woman from the pediatric hospital smiled. "I like the idea." Another trustee asked, "Who would lead it?" Jonathan thought for a moment. "I know exactly who should help design it." Monday evening. Elaine finished her shift just as Marcus approached, carrying another envelope. She laughed. "I'm beginning to worry whenever I see fancy stationery." Marcus grinned. "This one's hand-delivered." She opened it immediately. Inside rested another handwritten note. "Mrs. Owens, thank you for listening last Tuesday. Our conversation confirmed something I had only hoped was possible. The Bennett Foundation Board has approved the creation of a new community program inspired by your actions. Before anything becomes public, I would be honored if you would visit the foundation offices this Friday afternoon. I am not offering you charity. I am asking for your wisdom. Respectfully, Jonathan Bennett." Elaine stared at the final sentence. "I am asking for your wisdom." No one had ever written words like that to her before. Marcus watched her expression. Good news. I don't know. She handed him the letter. He read it once, then laughed. He isn't asking you to clean his office. No. I don't think he is. What are you going to do? Elaine folded the letter carefully. I'm going. Marcus smiled proudly. I hoped you'd say that. Friday afternoon arrived. Elaine entered the Bennett Foundation headquarters feeling completely out of place. Glass walls stretched toward the ceiling. Modern artwork decorated every hallway. Employees in tailored suits hurried between meetings. She instinctively looked down at her simple coat. A receptionist immediately stood. Mrs. Owens? Yes. Mr. Bennett is expecting you. Instead of escorting her directly upstairs, the receptionist led her through the Foundation's public exhibition hall. Photographs covered the walls, children receiving scholarships, families entering new homes, medical teams opening rural clinics. Elaine stopped at each display. She wasn't looking at the donors. She was studying the faces of the people being helped. A familiar voice interrupted gently. What do you see? Jonathan had quietly approached behind her. She smiled. Hope. He nodded. That's exactly what Evelyn always said. Together they entered a bright conference room. No executives waited inside. Only Jonathan, a pot of tea, several notebooks, and a whiteboard. Elaine looked surprised. Just us. Jonathan smiled. I wanted to hear your ideas before anyone else's. She laughed nervously. I'm not sure I have any. I think you do. He pulled out a chair for her. After they sat down, Jonathan drew 2 columns on the whiteboard, one labeled, What People Need, the other, What People Remember. He handed Elaine the marker. If a frightened child enters a hospital, what do they remember most? Elaine looked at the board. She thought about Ava, then slowly wrote one word. Kindness. Jonathan nodded. What about parents? She added another. Hope. What about lonely elderly patients? She smiled faintly. Being seen. Soon the whiteboard filled with simple phrases. Warm meals, gentle voices, patience, someone listening, a familiar face, small promises kept. Jonathan stepped back. Interesting? What? Not one of your answers cost money. Elaine looked surprised. I wasn't thinking about money. I know. You were thinking about people. Jonathan folded his arms. That's exactly why I needed you here. For the next 2 hours, they designed ideas unlike anything the Foundation had previously funded. Instead of only purchasing equipment, they discussed supporting hospital hospitality workers, training volunteers to comfort frightened children, recognizing cafeteria employees, janitors, receptionists, and security guards, whose quiet compassion often went unnoticed. Elaine hesitated before speaking again. Can I make one suggestion? Please. No competitions. Jonathan frowned slightly. What do you mean? If kindness becomes something people chase for prizes, it changes. Jonathan remained silent. She continued softly. Just let people nominate someone who quietly made their hardest day a little easier. No speeches. No popularity contest. Just gratitude. Jonathan slowly smiled. There it is. What? The wisdom I asked for. Elaine looked embarrassed. I was only speaking from experience. Exactly. As the meeting ended, Jonathan opened one final folder. There is one more thing. Elaine looked curious. Inside rested an official employment offer. She frowned. I don't understand. Jonathan slid the folder gently toward her. I would like you to become Community Compassion Advisor for the Silver Star Initiative. Elaine blinked. I've never worked in an office. I know. I've never managed programs. I know. I don't have a university degree. I know. She looked at him in disbelief. Then, why me? Jonathan answered without hesitation. Because degrees can teach management. Experience can teach strategy. But neither can teach someone to remove their own coat without stopping to calculate the cost. Silence filled the room. Elaine lowered her eyes to the folder. It represented an entirely different future. One she had never imagined. Jonathan didn't rush her. I don't need your answer today. I only ask that you think about it. Elaine closed the folder carefully. I will. As she walked toward the elevator, she looked once more at the words painted across the foundation lobby wall. Changing lives together. For the first time, she wondered whether, perhaps, her own life was quietly beginning to change as well. Elaine barely slept that night. The employment offer remained on her kitchen table. Every time she walked past it, she slowed down. She had spent 21 years cleaning hospitals, community centers, and office buildings. She knew how to remove stubborn stains from marble floors. She knew how to comfort frightened children while changing trash bags. She knew which elderly patients preferred warm tea instead of coffee. But she knew nothing about board meetings, budgets, foundation policies, strategic planning. She picked up the folder again. Community Compassion Advisor. The title still felt as though it belonged to someone else. Saturday morning, Marcus knocked on her apartment door carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. I figured you'd be awake. Elaine smiled. You know me too well. I also know you've been overthinking. She laughed. That obvious. Marcus stepped inside. The folder immediately caught his attention. You've read it 100 times. Closer to 20? Still too many. They sat at the kitchen table. Marcus stirred his coffee before speaking. What scares you? Elaine answered honestly. Everything. The responsibility. The attention. The possibility of disappointing people. Marcus nodded slowly. Anything else? She looked toward Ava's photograph. I'm afraid... She hesitated. That accepting means leaving behind the work I've always known. Marcus followed her gaze. You think Ava would want you to stay afraid? Elaine smiled sadly. No. You remember when she volunteered at the children's ward? Marcus asked. Elaine nodded immediately. She was only 6. She insisted on handing stickers to every child. Marcus smiled. She didn't care whether she was called a volunteer. She only cared that someone smiled. Elaine looked at the folder again. Perhaps Marcus was right. Maybe the work itself mattered more than the job title. At the Bennett mansion, Jonathan sat in the sunroom reviewing notes for the Silver Star Initiative. Sophia colored quietly beside him. After several minutes, she looked up. Daddy? Did Miss Elaine answer yet? Not yet. Sophia continued coloring. I think she's scared. Jonathan looked surprised. What makes you think that when people don't answer, sometimes they're scared? Jonathan smiled. You may be right. Sophia carefully chose another blue crayon. If she says no, can we still be friends? Jonathan answered without hesitation. Absolutely. The little girl smiled with relief. Later that afternoon, Jonathan drove alone to the community hospital where Elaine worked. He had no appointment, no intention of persuading her. He simply wanted to see the environment that had shaped the woman he admired. Marcus happened to notice him entering the lobby. Mr. Bennett. Marcus. I wasn't expecting you. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. Marcus glanced toward the pediatric wing. Elaine's on her break. Jonathan nodded. I'll wait. Instead of sitting in the executive lounge offered by hospital administrators, Jonathan chose an ordinary plastic chair near the children's waiting area. From there, he quietly watched. A frightened little boy cried before receiving stitches. A receptionist knelt beside him with a coloring book. An elderly janitor picked up a dropped teddy bear and returned it with exaggerated seriousness, making the child laugh. A cafeteria worker secretly added an extra cookie to an exhausted mother's lunch tray. Jonathan noticed something remarkable. None of these people realized anyone was watching. None expected praise. Yet together they created an atmosphere no expensive renovation could ever purchase. Then Elaine appeared, carrying a tray with 2 cups of soup. She wasn't scheduled in the cafeteria, yet she walked directly toward an elderly couple waiting outside intensive care. "I thought you might not have eaten." The elderly woman looked surprised. "Oh, you didn't have to." Elaine smiled. "I know." The woman accepted the soup with trembling hands. "Thank you." Jonathan watched from a distance. There it was again. The same quiet instinct. No speeches, no audience, no hesitation. Marcus approached Jonathan. "You see it now." Jonathan nodded slowly. "I do." "You can't train that." "No. You can only protect it." Before Elaine noticed him, Jonathan quietly stood. "I won't interrupt." Marcus looked puzzled. "You came all this way." "I found what I needed." He left without saying a word to Elaine. She never even realized he had been there. That evening, Jonathan wrote a short note. "Mrs. Owens, today I visited your hospital. You never saw me. I wanted to understand whether the kindness I witnessed at the museum was an extraordinary moment. I was wrong. It was simply an ordinary day for you. Whatever decision you make, thank you for reminding me that character is what we do when we believe nobody is watching. Jonathan." When the note arrived Sunday morning, Elaine read it slowly, twice. Then she quietly sat beside Ava's photograph. "I think he understands." The words surprised even her, not because Jonathan appreciated what she had done, but because he had looked beyond one dramatic evening. He had recognized the ordinary days, the ones no cameras ever captured. Sunday afternoon, Elaine visited the small cemetery where Ava rested. Fresh snow covered the ground. She brushed it gently away from the headstone. "Hello, sweetheart?" She placed 3 white daisies beside the stone. "I have a decision to make." The winter wind moved softly through the nearby pine trees. Elaine smiled. "I wish you could tell me what to do." Her eyes lingered on Ava's name. Then she'd remembered something. Years earlier, after receiving a handmade thank you card from another little patient, Ava had proudly declared, "Mommy, if one smile can travel, it should." Elaine had laughed at the strange sentence. Now she finally understood. One smile could travel. One act of kindness had already traveled from a freezing sculpture garden to a foundation boardroom. Perhaps it could travel even farther. She looked toward the winter sky. "I think I know my answer." Monday morning, Jonathan arrived at the foundation earlier than usual. He expected another busy week. Grant proposals, budget reviews, construction updates. Instead, his assistant entered carrying a familiar cream-colored envelope. It arrived by courier. Jonathan immediately recognized Elaine's careful handwriting. He opened it slowly. Inside rested a handwritten letter. "Dear Jonathan, thank you for asking me to consider something I never imagined possible. For several days I kept thinking about what you said. Then I remembered something my daughter once believed. She believed kindness should travel. If accepting this role helps kindness travel farther than I ever could alone, then I would be honored to help. I cannot promise impressive speeches. I cannot promise polished presentations. But I can promise to remember the people who often go unnoticed. If that is enough, then my answer is yes. With gratitude, Elaine Owens." Jonathan lowered the letter slowly. A quiet smile spread across his face. He pressed the intercom. "Please ask everyone to meet in the conference room." Right away, sir. Within minutes, the leadership team gathered. Jonathan entered, carrying only Elaine's letter. He looked around the room. Our community compassion advisor has accepted. Warm applause filled the room. Jonathan waited until it faded. Then he spoke. Today we begin building something different. Not a program centered on wealth. Not a program centered on recognition. But one centered on the simple belief that the quietest acts of compassion deserve to echo the loudest. At that exact moment, miles away, Elaine finished polishing the final hospital corridor before removing her housekeeping gloves one last time. She looked down at the worn gloves that had accompanied her through countless ordinary days. She folded them carefully and placed them inside her locker instead of throwing them away. Because no matter where the future led her, she never wanted to forget where the journey had begun. Elaine's final week as a housekeeping employee passed more quietly than she expected. She had hoped to slip away without ceremony. The hospital had other plans. On her last Friday morning, she arrived before dawn, exactly as she had for more than 2 decades. The security guard at the entrance smiled. "Morning, Mrs. Owens." "Morning, Frank." He held the door open. "I hear today's your last shift." Elaine laughed softly. "So, everyone knows." Frank shrugged. "Good people are hard to keep secret." She continued down the familiar hallway. Every corner carried a memory. The pediatric wing where Ava had spent so many afternoons drawing with other children. The quiet chapel where Elaine had often sat during lunch breaks after difficult days. The long corridor outside intensive care where she had comforted countless strangers with nothing more than a warm cup of coffee and a listening ear. She moved more slowly than usual. Not because she was tired, because she wanted to remember. By mid-morning, Rebecca Collins unexpectedly arrived at the hospital. She was carrying a small gift bag. Elaine looked surprised. "Miss Collins? I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." Rebecca smiled. "I've been meaning to thank you properly." Elaine looked confused. "You already apologized." "I know." "This isn't about that." Rebecca handed her the bag. Inside rested a simple silver pin, shaped like a tiny star. Nothing extravagant, just elegant enough to catch the light. Rebecca explained quietly, "The museum staff created these years ago. We planned to give them to employees who represented our values. We never actually awarded one." Elaine looked up. "I can't accept this." "I think you should." Rebecca smiled warmly. "Because you reminded all of us what those values actually mean." Elaine carefully fastened the little silver star onto her cardigan. It rested directly above her heart. "Thank you." Rebecca nodded. "No. Thank you." As she walked away, she realized something remarkable. Months earlier, she would have evaluated Elaine based on job title. Now she evaluated people by character. Elaine had changed far more than one freezing night. She had quietly changed everyone around her. That afternoon, the hospital cafeteria filled with unusual activity. Marcus had somehow convinced nearly every department to stop by for 15 minutes. Nurses, doctors, receptionists, maintenance workers, volunteers, even patients who had been discharged earlier in the week returned. Elaine entered carrying a tray, expecting an ordinary lunch. Instead, everyone stood. Applause echoed through the cafeteria. She froze. "Oh no," Marcus laughed. "Too late?" "You can't escape." A long table displayed homemade desserts. No expensive decorations. No elaborate speeches. Just food prepared by people who genuinely cared. The hospital director stepped forward. "I know you dislike attention." Several coworkers laughed knowingly. "So I'll keep this short." He looked around the room. "Hospitals are often remembered because of surgeons, or groundbreaking treatments, or advanced technology." He paused. "But healing begins long before medicine. Sometimes healing begins with someone who notices a frightened child, or brings soup to exhausted parents, or remembers every patient's favorite tea. He looked toward Elaine. You reminded us that compassion belongs to everyone. The applause returned. Elaine wiped away tears she could no longer hide. Marcus handed her a small, wrapped package. She opened it carefully. Inside rested a brand-new pair of housekeeping gloves. Across one wrist, every employee had signed their names using permanent silver ink. She smiled through tears. I'll never wear these. Marcus grinned. We know. They're for remembering. That evening, Jonathan and Sophia waited together at the Foundation headquarters. The first planning session for the Silver Star Initiative would begin Monday. Sophia had insisted on decorating Elaine's new office herself. Tiny potted plants stood on the windowsill. A blue ceramic mug waited beside the computer. The child's drawing, titled "The Warmest Day of Winter," hung in a simple frame beside the desk. Jonathan noticed one empty wall. What should go there? Sophia thought carefully. A mirror. A mirror. So everyone remembers they can be kind, too. Jonathan smiled. That's actually a wonderful idea. Monday morning arrived, bright and crisp. Elaine stood outside the Bennett Foundation wearing the same cream blouse she had worn to lunch with Jonathan weeks earlier. Only one thing had changed. The small silver star Rebecca had given her rested above her heart. She took one deep breath, then walked inside. Employees greeted her warmly. No one treated her as though she didn't belong. Jonathan met her in the lobby. Ready? I think so. I should warn you. About what? You're about to meet 30 people eager to learn from you. Elaine laughed nervously. That still sounds impossible. It won't after today. Inside the conference room, Foundation staff stood as she entered. Jonathan made only the briefest introduction. This is Elaine Owens. She has spent more than 20 years proving that compassion is not a department. It is a decision. Then he stepped aside. Instead of giving a prepared presentation, Elaine simply began telling stories. She spoke about frightened children, lonely elderly patients, volunteers who quietly stayed after their shifts, janitors who decorated hallways during holidays, receptionists who remembered names, kitchen staff who noticed when someone hadn't eaten. No statistics, no corporate language, only real people. As she spoke, employees filled pages with notes. One young program manager finally raised her hand. Mrs. Owens, what is the most important quality we should look for when recognizing someone? Elaine smiled. The people who are surprised to be recognized. The room became silent. She continued. If someone spends every day hoping to be noticed, that's understandable. But the people who quietly help because they simply can't walk past suffering, they're usually the ones saying, I didn't do anything special. Jonathan looked around the room. He could see the idea taking root. This initiative would never become another publicity campaign. It would become something different, something genuine. After the meeting, Sophia ran into Elaine's office carrying a folded sheet of paper. I made the sign. Elaine unfolded it. Written in careful handwriting were the words, No child should ever feel cold and alone. Elaine stared at the sentence. Her own words. The promise she had carried since losing Ava. She looked at Jonathan. I don't know if this belongs in an office, Jonathan answered quietly. I think it belongs everywhere. Together they hung the sign beside the child's drawing, the blue picture frame, the handwritten promise, the tiny silver star pinned to Elaine's cardigan. 3 simple reminders that extraordinary change often began with ordinary kindness. Late that afternoon, as employees prepared to leave, Jonathan paused outside Elaine's office. Through the open door, he watched her help a new intern reorganize folders after the young woman accidentally dropped everything onto the floor. Elaine knelt beside her without hesitation, smiling, encouraging, treating the embarrassed intern with the same gentle patience she had shown frightened children. Jonathan smiled to himself. Nothing about her had changed, only the building around her. And somehow, that was exactly why he knew the Silver Star Initiative would succeed, because its heart had never been located inside the foundation. Its heart had walked through the front door, carrying a worn purse, a faded handkerchief embroidered with a silver star, and a lifetime of quiet compassion. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow disappeared from Boston's sidewalks. Tiny green leaves returned to the city parks. Inside the Bennett Foundation, the Silver Star Initiative quietly began reaching places no one had expected. Every week, handwritten nominations arrived from across the state. A school custodian who secretly repaired broken backpacks. A cafeteria worker who remembered every child's food allergies. A bus driver who waited an extra minute each morning for a boy who walked with crutches. A night shift receptionist who called lonely elderly patients by name before every appointment. Each story reminded Elaine of the same truth. Kindness had always been everywhere. People had simply forgotten to notice it. One afternoon, Elaine stood before an enormous bulletin board covered with photographs of nominees. She smiled as she pinned another picture into place. Jonathan entered carrying a folder. "I thought I'd find you here." Elaine laughed. "I spend more time with this wall than with my desk." "I've noticed." He handed her the folder. "The first quarterly report." She opened it. Thousands of nominations, hundreds of participating hospitals, schools, and shelters. Volunteer enrollment had nearly doubled. Employee retention had improved in several partner organizations, but one page caught her attention more than all the statistics. Letters. Real letters. One mother wrote that after reading about the initiative, she had finally thanked the hospital janitor who had comforted her son during chemotherapy. Another letter came from a retired teacher who admitted she had spent years overlooking cafeteria staff until now. A third was written by a 12-year-old girl. She simply wrote, "I want to grow up to be the kind of grown-up who notices lonely people." Elaine quietly closed the folder. Jonathan watched her. "Well," she smiled, "it traveled." "What did—" "The kindness." Weeks earlier, she had wondered whether one small act could travel. Now she had her answer. It already had. Across town, Sophia waited impatiently outside her elementary school. Today was Family Appreciation Day. Children had been invited to bring someone who inspired them. Most classmates arrived with parents or grandparents. Some came with older siblings. Sophia stood near the entrance holding 2 handmade invitation cards. Jonathan walked beside her. "You still haven't told me who the second card is for." She grinned mischievously. "It's a surprise." Moments later, a familiar figure appeared across the parking lot. Elaine. She wore a light blue spring dress beneath her cardigan. The tiny silver star still rested above her heart. Sophia ran toward her. "You came. I wouldn't miss it." The little girl hugged her tightly before taking her hand. Then she looked at Jonathan. "You can come too." Jonathan laughed. "I was hoping you'd say that." Inside the classroom, colorful artwork covered every wall. Mrs. Harper, Sophia's teacher, welcomed the visitors warmly. "Today, each student will introduce someone who has taught them an important lesson." Children spoke one by one. A firefighter father, a grandmother, an older brother serving in the military. Finally, it was Sophia's turn. She walked confidently to the front of the room. Instead of inviting only Jonathan forward, she turned toward both adults. "I want both of you." The classroom smiled. Jonathan and Elaine exchanged surprised glances before joining her. Sophia took a deep breath. "My daddy told me that promises matter." Jonathan felt emotion tighten in his throat. Then Sophia reached for Elaine's hand. "And Miss Elaine taught me," she looked up with bright eyes, "Nine, that no child should ever feel cold and alone." The room became completely silent. Sophia continued. "She gave me her coat when she thought nobody was watching." But somebody was. She smiled toward Jonathan. My daddy. Then she looked around the classroom. I think maybe God was watching too. Mrs. Harper quietly wiped away a tear. So did several parents. After the presentations ended, children hurried outside for recess. Mrs. Harper approached Elaine. I've heard about the Silver Star Initiative. Elaine nodded modestly. It's growing. The teacher smiled. I think it already reached my classroom. She gestured toward a bulletin board. Across the top, written in colorful letters, were the words, Ways we can notice others. Each child had written one promise beneath it. Invite someone sitting alone. Share my lunch. Say thank you. Help carry books. Smile first. Elaine stood silently reading every promise. She realized none of them required money, only attention. Exactly as Ava had believed. That evening, the Bennett Foundation hosted a small gathering. Not a glamorous gala, no reporters, no auction. Only the first group of Silver Star nominees and their families. A janitor, a bus driver, a cafeteria worker, a crossing guard, a shelter volunteer. None had expected recognition. Most looked embarrassed by the applause. Elaine loved that. Jonathan welcomed everyone briefly, then stepped aside. This evening isn't about speeches. It's about gratitude. He invited Elaine to say a few words. She walked slowly to the front of the room. For a moment, she simply looked around, at ordinary people wearing ordinary clothes, people whose names rarely appeared in newspapers. Then she began. When I lost my daughter, I believed the world had become a colder place. The room listened quietly. But over the years, I kept meeting people who carried warmth. A nurse who stayed after her shift. A volunteer who read stories. A cook who remembered birthdays. A janitor who made frightened children laugh. She smiled gently. I realized kindness doesn't ask permission before changing someone's life. It simply shows up. She paused. If anyone remembers my name years from now, I hope it isn't because I once gave away a uniform. I hope it's because more people began noticing each other. She looked toward Sophia. The little girl smiled proudly. Elaine finished with the same words she had whispered beside Ava's photograph so many times. No child should ever feel cold and alone. The room stood together in quiet applause. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Jonathan walked through the now empty foundation lobby. The building was silent. Only one office light remained on. Elaine was arranging new nomination letters for the following week. She looked up. You're still here. So are you. Jonathan smiled. I wanted to thank you. For what? For accepting. Elaine laughed softly. I'm the one who should thank you. You saw something in me I couldn't see myself. Jonathan shook his head. No. It was always there. I simply happened to notice. Those words stayed with Elaine long after she returned home. She climbed the familiar stairs to apartment 3C, unlocked the familiar door, placed her purse on the familiar table. Yet nothing felt quite the same. She walked to Ava's photograph. Beside it, she placed Sophia's drawing, The Warmest Day of Winter. The two pictures stood side by side, past and present, loss and hope. She unfolded the faded navy blue handkerchief one final time before placing it gently beneath both frames. The tiny silver star still shone despite the worn fabric. Elaine smiled through grateful tears. One act of kindness had never brought Ava back. It had never erased grief, but it had transformed grief into purpose, and purpose into hope for countless strangers she might never meet. Outside her apartment window, children laughed as they played beneath the warm spring sky. Elaine listened for a moment, then whispered the promise she would carry for the rest of her life. No child should ever feel cold and alone. This time the words no longer sounded like a farewell. They sounded like a beginning. Every life is shaped by defining moments, but the most powerful ones are often the smallest. A warm coat offered without hesitation. A gentle word spoken to someone who feels invisible. A hand extended when no one else is watching. These quiet acts rarely make headlines, yet they have the extraordinary power to restore hope, heal unseen wounds, and remind people that they still matter. Elaine never imagined that one simple decision on a freezing night would change her own future. She wasn't searching for recognition, wealth, or praise. She simply chose compassion over convenience. In doing so, she proved that true greatness is not measured by status, titles, or success, but by the kindness we show when we expect nothing in return. Every one of us has the ability to become the reason someone believes in humanity again. We may never know how far a single act of love will travel, but every act of genuine kindness creates a ripple that reaches hearts we may never meet. The world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more people willing to notice those who feel forgotten. Sometimes changing one life is enough to begin changing the world. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us about a moment when someone's kindness changed your life or when you had the chance to change someone else's. And if you enjoy uplifting stories that celebrate compassion, hope, and the quiet heroes among us, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and join us for more inspiring journeys every week. Thank you for